I now recognize the distinguished gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Clyburn, to offer a Democratic en bloc amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk and request that the reading be dispensed with.
The gentleman is, without objection, the amendment is dispensed with, and the gentleman's recognized to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, we have a choice today. We can either do the bare minimum to maintain assistance for the millions of Americans that rely on rental assistance for stable housing and homelessness services for shelter, or we can make our country's housing crisis worse. The Republicans' bill before us threatens to push over 400,000 households off assistance or out of stable housing, where they will be faced with evictions and homelessness, not because they did anything wrong, but because Congress chose to pretend to balance the budget on the backs of our most vulnerable neighbors. My amendment would help forge a different path for this bill. Now, let's be clear about what we are talking about. When we cut $770 million from Section 8 vouchers and fall $3 billion short of what is needed just to renew existing assistance, we're not just cutting numbers on a spreadsheet. We're cutting the lifeline for 140,000 families who will face eviction. When we slice public housing by 17%, we are falling short of what is needed to prevent the eviction of 230,000 low-income households and putting resident health and safety at risk at PHAs to forego necessary repairs. The Republican majority claims this bill promotes fiscal responsibility, but there's nothing fiscally responsible about worsening the homelessness crisis. The bill falls short of the renewal need for the continuum of care programs that provide shelter and services to people experiencing homelessness in every district, meaning 28,000 fewer people will get off the streets. It eliminates youth homelessness programs, abandoning our most vulnerable young people. This isn't governing, it's an abdication of our responsibilities on this committee. This bill fails to meet the needs of those who have no other options. 123,000 low-income seniors would face eviction from their Section 202 housing. Over 39,000 households with disabilities could lose Section 811 assistance. These aren't just statistics. These are our constituents, working families, seniors on fixed incomes, veterans, and people with disabilities. But inadequate funding levels are not the only threat the most vulnerable Americans contain in this bill. This bill also contains a provision that will provide unprecedented sweeping waiver authority for HUD, allowing the Secretary significant discretion to upend rental assistance and public housing programs by ignoring key statutory requirements such as income definitions, rent calculations, and eligibility requirement. This dangerous authority is an abdication of our responsibility as legislators, and it would pave the way for work requirements, true limits, and higher rents with no guardrails or assistance that the most vulnerable are protected. My amendment would ensure that sufficient funding is provided to continue housing and homelessness assistance for the most vulnerable Americans, prevent hundreds of thousands of evictions, and ensure that the HUD Secretary cannot rip assistance away from already working families. It also restores funding for other critical HUD responsibilities, including fair housing enforcement, which is slashed by 67% in this bill. Our civil rights laws are only as strong as their enforcement. That's why Congress has consistently granted funds for state and local fair housing enforcement, training programs, and HUD professionals who investigate discrimination complaints and ensure compliance. I ask my colleagues to join me in supporting this amendment to fulfill our most basic responsibilities in this bill, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. The gentleman from Arkansas is recognized to respond to the amendment.
I thank the chairman, and I rise in opposition to the amendment. First and foremost, I can't support the amendment because it causes the bill to exceed our allocation. If adopted, it would prevent this bill from going to the floor. We need this bill to go to the floor. This bill responsibly funds housing rental assistance programs. It provides the fiscal 25 level for tenant-based rental assistance and inflationary increases for project-based rental assistance, housing for the elderly, and housing for the disabled. The combined level for these four programs is $50 billion. That's a modest increase from FY25. We also provide new flexibilities to public housing authorities so they can stretch their dollars and serve just as many households in FY26 as they're supporting currently. In recent years, the cost of HUD rental assistance programs have skyrocketed, only in part, though, due to inflation. During and after COVID, HUD had struggled with non-payment of rent by tenants, along with over $1 billion in improper payments. My colleagues on the other side have advocated for the expansion of HUD rental assistance. Our approach, though, is to contain the growth of these programs and help these families move beyond subsidies and move toward self-sufficiency. We should all have that as a goal. Let me be clear, capping the growth of rental subsidies and providing tools to relieve administrative burdens will not, I say again, will not result in evictions. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would urge a no vote on the amendment.
I thank the gentleman. The gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Bishop. Oh, excuse me. Okay. The gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Bishop, is recognized for his comments on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise in support of the gentleman's amendment. In my opening remarks, I pointed out how this bill will abandon those who cannot meet the most basic human needs of shelter. This bill cuts into Section 8, public housing, and of course this amendment would restore low-income housing and homelessness assistance. It would increase the funding for Section 8, for public housing, and for homeless assistance grants. It would maintain youth homelessness demonstration grants, and it would strike the waive authority for work requirements, for rent increases, or for time limits. It would restore full funding for the fair housing activities, and it would restore funding for the domestic violence survivor set-aside within the continuum of care program. It would increase funding for Section 202 housing for the elderly. It would increase funding for Section 811 housing for persons with disabilities. And it would restore funding for VASH. I ask in my opening statement, who could be opposed to providing such assistance? And I ask now for everyone here to put your money where your mouth is and to vote to restore these essential housing programs. This is our opportunity to help our constituents, to help themselves, and to help Americans all over this country to have a better quality of life. I urge you to adopt this amendment, to improve this bill, and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Gentleman from Maryland is recognized for remarks on the amendment.
I usually forget to turn on the mic. I know. I have it on now. What I said was, they told us to turn on the mic, and I said, what everybody knows, I usually forget to turn on the mic. I strongly support this amendment. As everybody knows, I think that Mr. Womack is one of the most responsible and highest integrity members of this committee. And he is doing what he needs to do given the constraints that confront him. But I strongly support this amendment from Representative Clyburn and others to reverse this bill's cut to fair housing programs and other vital government services. Life's a series of trade-offs. And if you cut your incoming revenue by $5 trillion, you got to find that somewhere because that's an expenditure. And we are finding it by looking to cutting programs for the most vulnerable in America. When I helped pass the Americans with Disabilities Act back in 1990, which was voted upon by the House 403 to 20, one of the most bipartisan votes we've had on any substantial issue that I remember. And the Senate passed it 91 to 6. My colleagues and I focused a lot on housing discrimination because we knew it was one of the most significant obstacles the disability community faced to living with greater dignity, independence, and equality. On July 26th of this month, it will be 35 years since that act was signed. Housing continues to be a major problem for those with disabilities. Housing discrimination remains a problem today generally, considering that less than 5% of America's housing is accessible. Think of that. Less than 5% of housing today is accessible to those with disabilities. Predictably, that's why 53% of all housing discrimination complaints were filed by people with disabilities. This bill would make it even harder for these Americans to find a home by cutting the local fair housing activities by 67%. That includes severe reductions to the Fair Housing Initiatives Program, which funds nonprofits across the country that together process 75% of all fair housing complaints nationwide. The program dates back to the Reagan administration. We shouldn't be politicizing it. We certainly shouldn't be cutting it. This amendment will reverse this cut, ensuring that the voices of Americans with disabilities and others who face discrimination in housing won't be ignored, won't be silent, won't be heard. I ask my colleagues to support this amendment. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. The gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Wasserman Schultz, is recognized for comments on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to Ranking Member Clyburn for offering this amendment to restore critical funding to combat homelessness in the United States. Since FY18, a portion of the funding in the Continuum of Care Homelessness Assistance Grant Program has been set aside to help prevent homelessness among victims of domestic violence, stalking, and sexual assault. This funding has helped victim service organizations provide even more survivors with the assurance they need to leave their abusers, knowing they have a safe place to lay their head at night. Despite immense progress, there remains a critical need to expand these life-saving housing programs for survivors and their children. According to the National Network to End Domestic Violence, during just one day in 2024, over 8,000 women across the country who requested emergency shelter, transitional housing, or rapid rehousing programs were denied housing due to lack of resources. To put this into perspective, around 15% of survivors who were seeking housing within a 24-hour period were left without a secure place for them and their children. But instead of expanding this initiative, this bill cruelly cuts its dedicated funding altogether. It is unthinkable that we would strip thousands of survivors of the services they count on to rebuild their lives. For victims of domestic violence in particular, not having their own place to live can be a matter of life and death. We know that a victim of domestic violence is often forced to return to an abuser if leaving means homelessness. When a survivor makes the brave decision to leave their abuser, it is our job to ensure that they have the support and the resources they need to break abusive cycles. This means funding comprehensive, long-term solutions to ensure their safety and the safety of their families. Mr. Clyburn's amendment would do just that by restoring dedicated funding for the Domestic Violence Sexual Assault Bonus Program, we can continue to provide hope and care for victims who might otherwise face a lifetime of danger and insecurity. I urge my colleagues to vote in favor of this amendment, and I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. The gentlelady from New Jersey, Ms. Watson Coleman, is recognized for remarks on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of this amendment that would restore funding to fair housing activities, specifically to the Fair Housing Initiatives Program. Fair housing is not merely something we ought to enforce, it's the law, and it's the civil right. This bill slashes funding for fair housing activities by 67%, gutting our ability to investigate discrimination and educate communities about their rights. That includes eliminating the Fair Housing Initiatives Program, which provides grants to local nonprofits that investigate and resolve housing discrimination complaints. Cuts to fair housing enforcement don't just weaken federal policy, they leave states like New Jersey vulnerable to renewed exclusionary zoning, local resistance, and civil rights erosion. Without federal backing, state-level mandates like New Jersey's Mount Laurel-based affordable housing laws, well, they risk being undermined. Even with reform, local resistance persists. Without robust federal funds and programs like the Fair Housing Initiatives Program and translated materials, grants, communities, et cetera, with less legal infrastructure or resources are at a risk of seeing discrimination go unchecked. Restoring full funding to fair housing activities, programs that protect our civil rights nationwide, and ensure that states like New Jersey with highly contentious affordable housing implementation don't crumble under local resistance. You know, we must preserve not just the law, but the tools to enforce it. And we must remember what our history has shown us as it relates to fairness in the access to housing. I want to remind my friends on the other side that I meet on the elevators and in the apartment buildings that I know that these cuts don't represent who you are and what you believe in terms of not addressing the needs of the most vulnerable, the minority, the disabled, and the veteran in our society as it relates to housing. So we can't, in good conscience, just say to you that it is okay to support the agenda of a president who, with his father, had access to immense housing in the state of New York and intentionally discriminated against people of color that look like me in having access to that housing. This is not the direction in which we want to go as this country is supposed to stand on its values of equality and opportunity and fairness for all. So I ask you, please in your heart, support this amendment and any other opportunity you have to ensure that you are meeting the needs of the most vulnerable in our communities. You feed the homeless, you feed the hungry, you shelter the homeless, you clothe the naked, you visit the prisoners, and you accept the visitation of the strangers. That is who we are. That is who we've been. And if we call ourselves Christians, and many of us do, that is what Christ has said. So I stand in support of this amendment, and I ask you to do the same.
Thank the gentlelady. The gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized for remarks on the amendment.
I thank the chairman. I rise in support of Mr. Clyburn's amendment. I want to take a moment to talk about my portion, small portion of this en bloc, which would increase funding for Section 811 housing for persons with disabilities. As we all know, Section 811 is a program that develops and subsidizes rental housing with the necessary accommodations and supportive services for the very or extremely low income adults with disabilities. This bill put before us today provides $262 million for Section 811 housing for persons with disabilities. That is a $3.1 million cut that would be required to continue affordable housing assistance for those more than 39,000 households with disabilities, without risking a funding shortfall that could lead to further evictions for vulnerable people living on fixed incomes. So this amendment would simply do that. It would increase that funding to $265 million, that $3.1 million increase. We all know we have affordability housing crisis. This is even greater for the disability community. The fact is that sadly, the disabled community is lower income than the general population. The Urban Institute estimates, and these are 2021 numbers, about 1 in 5 disabled people had extremely low incomes, compared to about 1 in 12 non-disabled people. And supplemental security income, SSI, is not sufficient to afford decent housing in most of our country. In 2024, in my home state of Pennsylvania, the average rent on a one-bedroom was 116% of the average SSI payment. Looking at the national average, the numbers are even worse. Rent was 142% of the average SSI payment. Further, people with disabilities disproportionately encounter housing discrimination. According to the Fair Housing Alliance, over half of housing discrimination complaints are related to discrimination against people with disabilities. I have seen this in my community and in talking with our local Fair Housing Rights Center in southeastern Pennsylvania. The Urban Institute estimates that 18 million disabled Americans are eligible for federal housing assistance and are not receiving it. We cannot afford to underfund this program. If anything, we need to be investing more, much more. And so I'll close by thanking the gentleman, Mr. Clyburn, for this amendment that includes the 811 support, and I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting the entire amendment. I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. Gentleman from California, Mr. Levin, is recognized for remarks on the bill, or the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colleagues, I hope we can all agree that no veteran should go homeless. I spent the past 6 years before serving on appropriations as the lead Democrat on the House Veterans Affairs Subcommittee on Economic Opportunity that has jurisdiction over veteran homelessness, and working with my Republican colleagues there has been some of the most rewarding work I've done as a member of the House. That's why I was so disappointed to see the underfunding of HUD-BASH voucher renewals, and perhaps more alarmingly, no funding, none whatsoever, for any new HUD-BASH vouchers. As of April, there were over 90,000 families in housing thanks to a HUD-BASH voucher, but there are still over 32,000 homeless veterans in the United States. And that means two things. One is we need more funding in this bill to support the existing vouchers, and two, we don't have enough vouchers to support the veteran population. That's why I'm proud to rise in support of this Democratic en bloc, which includes my amendment to include $15 million for new HUD-BASH vouchers. I know this amendment doesn't include an offset. That's because there are too many other important programs that are underfunded in this bill, also, some of which I discussed before. I personally find it inconceivable that anybody would have set the allocation for this subcommittee so low that we are not even trying to house our homeless veterans. We haven't even debated the full subcommittee allocation, so it's absurd to think that we just don't have the money for any new HUD-BASH vouchers. And I just want to remind everybody, the decisions we make here impact the lives of veterans in every one of our districts. I want to share the story of one of my constituents named John. He received an honorable discharge, and then he built an incredible 40-year career in aerospace manufacturing. But he had a chronic medical condition that left him disabled and ultimately homeless. And he spent several years navigating life on the streets and in shelters throughout San Diego County. He connected with an outreach team from one of our amazing service providers in San Diego. He used grant and per diem funding to stay in a variety of shelters, and he finally secured a HUD-BASH voucher in January of 2025, and he's doing great. Without the new funding that I'm proposing here, that I hope everybody would support, veterans like John will suffer. Look, we're either serious about ending veteran homelessness or we're not. We shouldn't hide behind an arbitrary limit set for this subcommittee, which I remind everyone we have not voted on. A no on this amendment means that you're okay with 32,000 homeless veterans. And frankly, it also means, to my point during the opening, that everybody is okay with abdicating their responsibility under a very nice plaque, again, Mr. Chairman, Article 1, Section 9, Clause 7, that no money shall be drawn from the Treasury but in consequence of appropriations made by law. Along those lines, Mr. Chairman, I'd ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a Politico article from earlier this morning.
Without objection.
The title is Russ Vote, Appropriations Process, quote, has to be less partisan. My colleagues, I hope you read this article. Less bipartisan, excuse me, I buried the punchline. Russ Vote, Appropriations Process, quote, has to be less bipartisan. The OMB director said more rescissions packages could soon be headed to the Hill. Look, I know that if we had a Democrat in the White House and we had a Democratic OMB chair that said this to us, I would tell him to take a walk. That's ridiculous. We're the Congress of the United States. And one of the things he says in here is, and I quote, there is no voter in the country that went to the polls and said, I'm voting for a bipartisan appropriations process, Vote said. That may be the view of something that appropriators want to maintain. Well, Mr. Vote, you're damn right. This appropriator wants to maintain. My colleagues, we were sent here to do the people's business. I was sent here by Republicans and Democrats and independents alike. And I'm going to do the work to work with all of you in a good faith bipartisan way. And I'm not going to let the Office of Management and Budget tell me what to do, and I hope you won't allow them to tell you what to do. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Are there other members wishing to? Our gentleman from New York is recognized to address the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of this amendment by restoring Section 8 and public housing funding levels. The amendment ensures that there are no shortfalls in the programs that help thousands upon thousands of families. The demand for housing vouchers is only growing in the city of New York, with historically low vacancy rates and skyrocketing rents. If we were to allow this shortfall, it would devastate communities across the country. There is, again, a homelessness crisis unprecedented and a lack of affordable housing in the market. In fact, many families are paying 50% of their income towards rent. Most experts seem to feel that they should not pay above 30% of their income towards rent so that they could not have financial issues. But the fact of the matter is that housing costs and rents continue to rise, and people are just being priced out. I bet that in every one of our districts, there are communities and neighborhoods where people are being priced out. And so the way to help people is to provide for restoration of Section 8 and public housing funding, as well as investments for affordable housing and future home ownership. Many of our districts also have low levels of home ownership, and young families are really strapped, Mr. Chairman. They cannot move forward with the kind of cost for housing. In fact, daycare and housing, the cost of housing are the two great impediments for a young family to move forward. And we all know that also healthcare is a major problem, but young people sometimes go by without having health insurance. They feel they are immortal until they get sick, of course. But to have them pay excessive rent and then have them meet the cost of daycare, in which case many mothers and fathers decide to stay home and not work because it's so expensive, is holding our country back. We got the foot on the brake. We can't not unleash success if we don't take care of this housing crisis and this affordability crisis. And as I said earlier, Mr. Chairman, the HUD secretary recognized that, but yet the administration decides to cut over 50% of the HUD budget. And here we are also proposing additional cuts that will devastate American families. And I ask for everybody to be mindful of that, and I support Mr. Clyburn's en bloc amendment. I think is a wise one and one that is in support of the best interests for all Americans. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized for remarks on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to speak on two provisions briefly here. The first is Ms. Wasserman Schultz provision with respect to domestic violence. I was a young prosecutor, and one of the cases I got pretty early in my career was a domestic violence case. And the interesting thing about it was we never went to trial because the woman who was the victim of the domestic violence and was pretty knowledgeable about how the legal system was working was like, well, he didn't beat me that badly. I wasn't even hospitalized this time. So I know if we go forward and even if we get a conviction, probably be a conviction for second-degree assault. He'll probably get probation. He could be home tonight before I even get there. So, Mr. Ivey, I guess I'm just going to have to keep taking the beatings. And one of the things that was part of that was she couldn't just up and leave because she had a child who was, I think he was a male who was 14. And a lot of the shelters, once males hit around 14 or 15 years old, they won't let the kid come in. So she was looking at a choice between staying and taking the beatings and allowing her children to have a steady home of a sort, because we all know the generational curse that domestic violence imposes on the children, of course. But the other option was to just be out, because she couldn't go to a shelter. She wasn't going to leave her child out there to fend for himself. So she didn't really have any other options. So I was quite surprised to see that the funding to help domestic violence survivors escape that sort of abuse had been cut. Because I know we all are aware of the ripple effect impact that domestic violence has, especially on young males. And when I later became a homicide prosecutor, and we take a look at these young men, frequently their first offense was a homicide. And you look and you're like, well, how did he get there? Almost invariably, when you peeled the onion back, domestic violence was part of it. And of course, we saw the most horrific outcomes from that. The one I remember the best was when the guy went back and set his ex on fire, almost burned her to death. Why would we stand in the way of helping survivors get away from that? I know these are tight times financially. I know there's a lot of budgetary concerns. We disagree on some of the choices that have been made. But I'm surprised that there'd be a disagreement on this one. So I hope you all will reconsider that. The fair housing issue, that provision as well. You know, I'm a young man. I was a kid, actually, in Rocky Mount, North Carolina in the 60s. Civil rights movement was in motion. It was going, but the city was still racially divided, literally almost exactly along the railroad tracks lines. And I can remember when that legislation passed because it opened things up from a housing standpoint and from a job standpoint, too. My father was able to get a better job. We were able to move into a better house. Lives were transformed by that. But the only way it works, because I know a lot of hearts and minds have changed, but a lot have not. And if you don't have an enforcement provision to make it work, it's not going to work. So I'd urge my colleagues to reconsider on these two provisions. These are important provisions that have helped to make America a better place. We still have a lot of work to do. We still have a long ways to go. We've got a great track record of things that we have accomplished in the past. But let's keep moving it forward. And let's make sure we don't leave people behind like domestic violence survivors and their children. Let's not leave people behind like the people who are victims of discrimination. We've got to have enough money to take care of that. In this America, in the wealthiest country in the history of the planet, these are two things that we should be able to do. So I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and with that, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Are there others wishing to address the amendment? If not, the gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for 1 minute to close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank my colleagues for supporting this amendment, Mr. Chairman. Many of my Republican colleagues have argued that the flexibilities provided in this bill will allow housing providers to absorb these insufficient funding levels without reducing the number of people assisted. But that could mean increasing the rent burden on assisted households, imposing work requirements, or setting time limits for assistance, which also put families at risk of eviction. And the eviction thing bothers me a whole deal because I think I've said before in this committee that two of the highest eviction communities in this country, North Charleston, South Carolina, and Columbia. North Charleston, number 1 in my congressional district. Columbia, number 6, according to the Princeton study. There's something interesting about those two communities. They are both military communities, and evictions of military personnel. I don't mean veterans, I mean active duty military, whose families are evicted in many instances while they are serving overseas. So I urge my colleagues to do the right thing for the most vulnerable and, I might say, most patriotic people in our country and support my amendment, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. The question is now, excuse me.
I request a roll call vote.
Well, I hadn't actually put it to the voice vote yet, so.
Oh, I thought you were asking. I'm sorry, Mr.
Oh, no,
Well, we better wait with bated breath to see what it is.
okay. You never know. You may win. Yeah. Okay, the question is now on the gentleman's amendment. All those say in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Roll call has been requested. A sufficient number of hands have been raised, and the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Adderholt. Mr. Aguilar. Mr. Aguilar, aye. Mr. Alford. Mr. Alford, no. Mr. Amade. Mr. Amade, no. Mrs. Bice. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop, aye. Mr. Calvert. Mr. Carter. Mr. Carter. Mr. Carter, no. Mr. Case. Mr. Case, aye. Mr. Siscomani. Mr. Siscomani, no. Mr. Klein. Mr. Klein, no. Mr. Cloud. Mr. Cloud, no. Mr. Clyburn. Mr. Clyburn, aye. Mr. Clyde. Mr. Clyde, no. Mr. Cole.
No.
Mr. Cole, no. Mr. Cuellar. Ms. Dean. Ms. Dean, aye. Mr. Loro. Mr. Loro, aye. Mr. Diaz-Balart. Mr. Diaz-Balart, no. Mr. Edwards. Mr. Edwards, no. Mr. Elzey. Mr. Elzey, no. Ms. Escobar. Ms. Escobar, aye. Mr. Espaillat. Mr. Espaillat, aye. Mr. Fleischman. Ms. Frankel. Ms. Frankel, aye. Mr. Franklin. Mr. Franklin, no. Mr. Gonzalez. Mr. Gonzalez, no. Mr. Guest. Mr. Guest, no. Mr. Harder. Dr. Harris. Mrs. Henson. Mrs. Henson, no. Mr. Hoyer. Mr. Hoyer, aye. Mr. Ivy. Mr. Ivy, aye. Mr. Joyce. Mr. Joyce, no. Ms. Capter. Ms. Capter, aye. Mr. Lalota. Mr. Lalota, no. Ms. Lee. Ms. Letlow. Ms. Letlow, no. Mr. Levin. Mr. Levin, aye. Ms. Malloy. Ms. Malloy, no. Ms. McCollum. Ms. Ming. Mr. Molinar. Mr. Molinar, no. Mr. Moore. Mr. Morelli. Mr. Morelli, aye. Mr. Mervan. Mr. Mervan, aye. Mr. Newhouse. Mr. Newhouse, no. Ms. Perez. Ms. Pingree. Ms. Pingree, aye. Mr. Pocan. Mr. Pocan, aye. Mr. Quigley. Mr. Quigley, aye. Mr. Reschenthaler. Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers, no. Mr. Rutherford. Mr. Rutherford, no. Mr. Simpson. Mr. Simpson, no. Mr. Strong. Mr. Strong, no. Mrs. Torres. Mrs. Torres, aye. Ms. Underwood. Ms. Underwood, aye. Mr. Valadeo. Ms. Wasserman Schultz. Ms. Wasserman Schultz, aye. Mrs. Watson Coleman. Mrs. Watson Coleman, aye. Mr. Womack. Mr. Womack, no. Mr. Zinke. Mr. Zinke, no.
Are there any other members wishing to record their vote or change their vote? Gentlelady from New York.
Ms. Ming, aye.
Gentleman from California.
Mr. Harder, aye.
Gentleman from Tennessee.
Mr. Fleischman, no.
Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Cuellar, aye.
Gentlelady from Washington.
Ms. Perez, aye.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Reschenthaler, no.
Gentleman from West Virginia.
Mr. Moore, no.
Gentlelady from Oklahoma.
Mrs. Bice, no.
Gentleman from Alabama.
Mr. Adderholt, no.
Gentleman from Gentleman from California.
Mr. Valadeo, aye.
Are there any other members?
Dr. Harris, I don't believe I got Dr.
Gentleman's not recorded.
No. Dr. Harris, no.
Okay. Are there any other members wishing to record or change their vote? Seeing none, the clerk will tally. On this vote, the ayes are 27, the noes are 33. The amendment is not adopted.